Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and I want to welcome you back to another edition of your Adrenal Fix impromptu Facebook Live. So this is what my board looks like if you've just had me review your genetic test. And this is dedicated to TB in Australia. I love working with you. We're making awesome strides, and you've inspired me to do this for tonight. So what I want to do is I want to erase this because right now it looks like jibber jabber and you have no idea what it means. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to explain how MTHFR has to do with your stress response. And so talking about stress, I'm the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja. And so when we have stressors like having a deadline, having a job proposal, having to make finances so that you can pay your bills, having to report things to the government like taxes, having to deal with family members and spouses and children and grandparents. When you have these stressors and you don't have appropriate responses to these stressors, then you get exhausted, you feel burnt out, you get panic-stricken, you get irritable, maybe you have some compulsions or addictions, maybe you can't fall asleep. So let's talk about that. And what does methyl-folate have to do with that? Or what does MTHFR have to do with that? And so first of all, a lot of people, when I talk to you on the call or on the phone and you're in overwhelm and you just can't get out of that, fight or flight mode, I'll say to you, hey, what have you done? And they'll say, I've done everything. I've been to so many different doctors and they've done everything and nothing works. And then I'll say to you, okay, well, tell me about your genetic test. What did they tell you with that? And they'll look at me like I have three heads and they'll say, well, I never did a genetic test. Why would I even want to do a genetic test? And so what a genetic test will do is it will tell you about your susceptibilities, meaning how susceptible are you to not being able to turn off the expression of an infection? Or how susceptible are you to not be able to make energy at the demand that you need to be able to make it? Or repair your DNA so that you feel like you're always breaking down, you're losing your hair, your skin is very dry, you have low white blood cells or low red blood cells, or you have brain fog because you can't acquire new information, or you're always anxious. These are susceptibilities. And why does that tend to run in the family? Why does mom have anxiety? Why was there compulsions in the family or addictions? Those are the things that you're going to learn from doing a genetic test. And then you'll say, well, I don't have MTHFR, or I do have MTHFR and I'm taking methyl-folate and I have it covered. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share with you a little bit about that today. So what I want to do is I want to explain it in easy terms. So let's talk about this as your dopamine pathways, or we're going to call it your excitatory. And so when this pathway is filling up properly, then we have pleasure, we have motivation, we are able to have sequential planning, we don't want to feel isolated, we're not easily angered, we deal with stress, because ultimately it makes your dopamine, it makes your noradrenaline, or your norepinephrine and your epinephrine. So those are all the things that we need to be able to deal with stressors properly. Then we have our inhibitory. So we're going to call this our serotonin pathway. And this is our inhibitory. And so these are things more like contentment, being able to be in rest and digest, being able to be calm and relaxed, and being able to feel happy. So ultimately, if we have proper functioning making of these neurotransmitters and removal of these neurotransmitters, so we want to open up a little sort of drain, and we want to open up a little drain. We want to make sure that we're making and breaking these neurotransmitters down at a good rate to deal with stressors. And there's a lot of things that go into it. And what I want to tell you about is, what does MTHFR have to do with it? So MTHFR, it's an enzyme that makes methylated folate. And we're just going to put a methyl group on the end. And when that's happening optimally, then methylfolate does two things. More than two things, but in this case, we're talking about making something called BH4. And that tetrahydrobiopterin is a cofactor for you to be able to make your neurotransmitter. So think of it as we have a pool. We have a pool of inhibition or a pool of serotonin. And this is the tap that we turn on. And if you have a methylfolate problem, let's say you have a plus minus or a plus plus, even if you have a minus minus, because there's cofactors that enzyme needs for it to work properly, then you're not going to make your BH4, and your BH4 is not going to help fill up your excitatory pathway, or your BH4 is not going to help fill up your inhibitory pathway. So if we have too much inhibition and not as much excitation, we're going to feel very inhibited, and we're going to have maybe some depression and not be able to sleep or be tired all the time. Or if we have too much excitatory problems and not much inhibitory, then we can have too much excitatory problems. Sometimes we can have too much of this and too little of this, and then we'll have way too much serotonin problems. Or sometimes we can have too much of this and not enough of this and have too much dopamine problems. So lots that goes in there. But the other thing that methylfolate does is it helps make SAMe. And SAMe is very important for the draining of things. So methylfolate can cause two problems. It helps make the neurotransmitters, and it helps break down the neurotransmitter. So it's in checks and balances, but sometimes what happens is there's more of a problem in the making of it than there is of the breaking. So if there's more of a problem of the making of it, you're not getting a lot of your neurotransmitters to be forming in order to mount a stress response or be in fight or flight or be in parasympathetic rest and digest mode. Or if you have more of a problem with your breaking down of it, then it can pool too much. And now you have a problem with a oxidized or a stagnant, like any pool that you're not draining out, it becomes kind of crappy neurotransmitters. And that can be a major problem. But where you get the perfect storm is if you have a problem with making it and breaking it, or breaking it and making it. And neurotransmission is really important for focus, for concentration, for not being in overwhelm. And we look at an organic acid test that tells us about your HVA. So it tells me, is that high or is that low? We look at your VMA, is that high or is that low? We look at your 5-HIAA, is that high or is that low? And we can get some good ideas, because what can happen is you can have these enzymes that are actually working too fast. Because a lot of you are told, well, I have an MTHFR inhibition and it slows down the rate at which that enzyme works. So I'm not able to make methylfolate optimally. If I'm not able to make methylfolate, then I'm not making BH4. If I'm not making BH4, then I have nothing coming down here. And I also am not draining it. But sometimes what happens is you can have a upregulation. So you can have a double whammy where you're not making your neurotransmitters effectively, and then what's happening is your COMT or your MAO-A is actually upregulated, and it's draining the bank, or it's draining the supply. And that can create a lot of anxiety. And what's really more difficult is you can have a problem where you have the exact opposite phenomena, where you're bringing in too much and you're not draining enough, and you have anxiety as well. So you can have someone that has anxiety because they're not making enough and they're draining it too quickly, or you can have someone who's having anxiety because they're making too much and they're not draining it enough. So that's really, really important. I wanted to explain that. The other thing I wanted to explain was iron. So if you're not absorbing your iron, or you have an iron deficiency, then what's going to happen is iron is a cofactor for this, And now it's not a methyl-folate problem, because it's an iron problem where the iron is the cofactors for this. So that's where we look at your gastrointestinal system. We make sure that there's not like an H. pylori or a candida or a yeast overgrowth or a parasite or mycotoxins or biofilms, because if you have those types of things, then it's going to impact your ability to absorb iron. But what will it also do is it will impact your ability to absorb B12. And B12 is part of the equation to help make that SAMe. And so now all of a sudden, you're not draining properly, but you're also not bringing a lot of that nutrients into the bucket. And that could actually work in your favor. The way it would work in your favor is if you don't have that B12 because you're not absorbing it from the foods, and then you're not making your SAMe, it's going to slow down the drainage. But it's also going to allow whatever is trickling down into there to stay around longer. And that's what those reuptake inhibitors do as medications, is they allow those nutrients to stay around longer. So that's really, really important. But some people will tell me, hey, I take methyl-folate and I do terrible. I get more anxious. Why would that be? That could be for a couple of reasons. That could be because it produces more BH4. And so what it's doing is it's bringing more nutrients into here, but then you got all of these blockages way downstream, and then it slows down the pooling of this nutrient, and you're not able to clear it, and it makes you more anxious. Or it could be another reason where you take the methyl-folate and it increases your BH4, but you don't have these blockages, and it also removes it a lot quicker than you ever did. Lots of things that you have to understand. I also want to know, is there a gastrointestinal inflammation? Is there a Clostridia infection? Is there a candida overgrowth? If there is, then you have this whole other phenomena where the tryptophan that you're eating in your protein is going down an excitatory pathway, and it's blocking the ability of your neurotransmitters, coupled with your MTHFR not being able to go down there, coupled with iron problems, and coupled with SAMe problems. So there's lots going on there. I hope you found that helpful. Basically, let's see if we can answer some of your questions here. So Timur, I hope you're doing well. I have one SNP on MTHFR, and I used to take 400 milligrams of methyl-folate, but I felt worse. So that's probably what we were just talking about, where probably what happened was you didn't fix the downstream problems. Maybe you're dealing with a major infection, and then your nitric oxide is elevated. If your nitric oxide is elevated, then it's going to sedate your ability to use B12. And what's going to happen is you're just going to produce more nitric oxide from taking methyl-folate. And when you do that, you're probably going to bring more dopamine and the adrenaline into this pathway, but you're not competing, or you're not completing this cycle so that it's not able to drain. And then it causes more problems up here and more excitatory problems. Hopefully that made sense to you. I have COMT and MAO-A as well. So those enzymes, a lot of the times, those MAO-As or COMTs can be upregulated. So you might actually have that perfect storm where you're actually clearing it out a lot quicker, and that's causing your neurotransmitters to tank and your dopamine levels to tank. And that's where you tend to have maybe people that have addictive personalities, where they have, like, they're shopaholics, they're alcoholics, or they're doaholics. And as a result, they're doing that to get the dopamine spikes. And that could be one of the reasons you have that. Can you fix my problem with a hoard anxiety disorder? I could never fix this myself. Maybe, I don't know. Potentially, we got to look at the genetic susceptibilities is one thing. One of the things that you're not seeing on here is a vitamin called FAD. FAD is made by the thyroid. So if you have a hypothyroid problem, that can be one of the main things that aren't allowing your neurotransmitters to clear out, and that's creating anxiety. So I don't know. I certainly could try to help. We do a lot of consulting with patients abroad. If you're interested, we do consults to determine, hey, what's not working in your health? Where is it that you want to be? What have you done? Why are you not getting there? And if you're really serious about fixing this, here's what I think you need to do if I feel I can help you. So anyways, I just wanted to share with you guys that today, and watch this video over and over and over again, and understand that there is help, there is hope, that you don't have to keep suffering, and there is solutions to your overwhelm and your stress response. So once again, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. Call myself the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and I look forward to ending your adrenal fatigue nightmare. Have a wonderful evening.